My name is Dot Porter, and I'm the Curator for Digital Research Services in the University of Pennsylvania Libraries, and this is my exhibit. It's called Reactions, Medieval Modern, and it's about the reactions that humans have had to medieval manuscripts over time, and also how manuscripts have had an influence on popular culture. The exhibit is in 5 sections, and during our short video tour, I will show you a little bit about each section. The first section that you see after you enter the gallery is all about the reuse of illustrations. And this one you can see here there are sort of several pages that have been excised from manuscripts, and these are in good condition, and they haven't really been reused. They sort of were cut out and they look nice. Here's one where the text was, either the illustrations were cut out of the page or the text was cut out of the page, but what we have are the borders and the illuminated initial from this page. But my favorite example from this whole section, and maybe my favorite thing in the entire exhibit, is these 2 things here, MS Call 713. These are breviary collages, and what happened was there was a 15th century breviary, and sometime, we think probably in the 1800s, somebody got their hands on this breviary and thought, wouldn't it be nice if I just cut out all the pretty bits and made a collage out of it? And so that's what they've done. You can see the miniatures are in the center, and then parts of the borders have been pasted on the outside, and then there are little bits of text with illuminated initials around the edges. So I kind of love to hate these. I appreciate them as an example of how manuscripts were perceived and used during this period of time, but I also wish that we could maybe still have that breviary, but that's okay. Another thing that I'm really excited about in the exhibit is over here. So we have a book, and then we have 2 leaves. And the book is Louis E. 29 from the Free Library of Philadelphia. This was a Bible that was illustrated by William de Brailles, who was quite a famous artist in the 13th century. And these 2 leaves are Ricketts 325 and Ricketts 353 from the Lilly Library at Indiana University in Bloomington. And these leaves used to be part of this Bible. So they were actually excised at some point in the past, and I was really pleased to be able to bring them together as part of this exhibit. So the next section that we get is a section about technology. And technology, when it comes to manuscripts, covers a lot of ground, because you're talking about technology in terms of the physical object, but also digital technology, and I wanted to be sure to cover it. So the first case has several items that have been treated in some sense or another. So here we have an Arabic manuscript that has pink paper margins. So most of the margins in this book have been replaced, although some of them that had notes on them, you can see here. If there were notes, they were maintained, and sort of the paper was placed around them, but otherwise the paper replaces the margins. And then here, this is a manuscript from our collection, MS Codex 197, and last year it was rebound. Here's the old binding. The old binding was, I think, an 18th century, not very nice, sort of cardboard binding. And the new binding is done in the style of the original binding. So this is what the original book might have looked like with its original binding. And then finally, this one here, I love, and I'm sad that we can only show these 2 pages, because if you look in the center of these pages, what you'll see is a parchment patch. So you have parchment patches in the middle of these leaves, and I don't know what exactly happened to this book, but when you start turning the pages at the front of the book, you turn the pages and it's fine, and then you hit a page where there's a very large patch, and then you turn the page, and the next page has a patch and it's slightly smaller. And then again, and it goes several pages until finally the last page has a very small patch, and then the next page after that has no patch at all, and it's fine. So something, I don't know if it was oil, maybe somebody spilled oil. Oil would soak through parchments. Possibly that's what happened. But they were able to write over top of the patches. So they patched it up and then wrote the text over top. I just think it's very interesting. So another way of thinking about technology when it comes to manuscripts is technology as mediation. So if you think back it used to be that if you wanted a copy of a manuscript, you would copy it by hand, right? So think about, even in the Middle Ages, I want a copy of, the Psalter, I'm going to take someone else's Psalter and I'm going to copy it. And that was a sort of way of mediation. And then when we started being able to take photographs, you could take photographs of specific manuscripts. So here is a facsimile of a book called the Luttrell Psalter, which is additional manuscript 42130 in the British Library. And this is an older facsimile. This was made in 1932. It is incomplete, and you can see it's in black and white. So this was the state of the art in 1932. In 2006, the British Library published this facsimile. It's full color, and you can see this is open to the same page. So there it is in color, there it is in black and white. You can see the photography has come a long way. And of course now, if you're going to look at a manuscript, more often than not, at least the first look you get at a manuscript is going to be the digitized version. So over here we have the British Library website up, and there are actually 2 versions of this manuscript. This one is using a system called Turning the Pages, and then this is the British Library manuscript viewer. So usually when we look at a manuscript, we're going to be looking at the digital version these days. The next section of the exhibit is about the reuse of material. So a little bit earlier, we saw the first section was about the reuse of illustrations. And you saw some pages that were excised from manuscripts that were quite beautiful. This section celebrates pages that were excised, that were not so beautiful, but that actually, I think, had a more full and useful life. So let's take a look. You can see, these are a little messy, but what's going on with these? You can see the page has been turned on its side, and the corners have been cut out, and if you look closely, you can see that there are folds there. So these are pages that were used to cover other books. So the manuscripts themselves were no longer useful, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the pages and use them in fly leaves or as paste downs, that is, actually pasted inside the book, inside a cover, back cover or front cover, or we're going to fold them up and use them to cover other books. So here's another example. A lot of pieces that were used like this, or were used in other parts of bindings. Another example that is very interesting that you might have heard of is a palimpsest. So we have a lot of palimpsests. What is a palimpsest? So this is a palimpsest here. You can see this is a piece of parchment that had writing on it, and that writing was cleaned off, it was scraped off or washed off, and then it was written over again. So if you look at this, there's dark ink, but then you can see there's sort of a lighter ink underneath it. That's a palimpsest. So there's one. There's another one here. If you look carefully, you can see that there is very, very faint lines of text running vertically underneath the dark text that's horizontal. Another palimpsest. The first palimpsest that I had heard of really was the Archimedes palimpsest. And so I thought that they were rare, but they're not rare. We have a lot of them. Here's another one. Here. So this is reuse of manuscripts for the material, not because it's beautiful, but because we need to use it to do something else. So the next section takes up these cases in the middle of the room. And this is about signs of use. Signs of use, it's an umbrella term. Really everything in this room, almost everything in this room, is a sign of use. Signs of use are indications there that somebody used these manuscripts, that they didn't just sit on a shelf, that somebody took them down and read them and didn't only read them, but really interacted with them. So here is a manuscript, LJS 194. You can see the sort of main text of the book is that dark text in the middle of the page, but it's been written all over. And the person who wrote all over it wasn't the scribe, it wasn't the person who wrote the book originally, it was somebody else who was using it. This is a collection of geometrical texts, so it was somebody studying math and doing the math. And pretty much all of these have something like that. So this one was included because of this little manicule. So a manicule is something in the margin of a manuscript that points to the text. The name manicule comes from the Latin word manus, which means hand. Usually it's a little hand. This is obviously not a hand. This is a little tongue, but we still call it a manicule. Here is LJS, let me zoom out. Here's LJS 444. This is another manuscript that has significant glossing on one side of the page. So this had, if we look at it here, this had additions over 300 years and pages added in the 18th century. It's a 15th century manuscript. So this manuscript was actively used for over 300 years. People were writing in it, a section of it came out and it was placed again, and that's what you're seeing here. So the page on the left is one of the 18th century replacement pages, whereas the page on the right is an original page that has writing all over it. So this is really, I find this so completely fascinating that these books were used actively for such a long period of time. So here's another one of my favorites. This is LJS 101. And this is a 9th century manuscript, but part of it was replaced in the 11th century. So this happened quite a lot, actually, particularly with manuscripts that were used a lot. Part of a book would get worn or something would happen to it, and so you'd have to replace it. So the page on the right here is from the 9th century, and the page on the left is from the 11th century editions. And then the final section in the exhibit is manuscripts and the popular imagination. And this is about how we think about manuscripts. It's not necessarily about the objects themselves, but it's how they how they come into our imagination and what we want to do with them when we can't actually, when you don't have one and you can't do something to it, what are the other things that we can do? So these are just a few examples. This is a tabletop game called Ortus Regni, and as you can see, the cards use manuscript art on them. So here are the cards, and when they couldn't find art that did what they wanted it to in terms of the gameplay, they hired an artist who would make art that seemed like medieval manuscript art. So these cards here are not from medieval manuscripts, but they look similar. And then over here, this is actually manuscript art. So that's very fun. I have a program here at Penn where I introduce small children to medieval manuscripts. And this is the book that I use when I talk to them. This book is called Marguerite Makes a Book. It is published by Getty Publishing. And it's about a little girl named Marguerite, there she is. And she has to help her papa finish an illuminated manuscript. So she goes around Paris and she gets all the ingredients she needs. She makes the ink, which is what she's doing here. And then of course in the end she finishes the book and the patron is very impressed and it ends very happily. So I wanted to be sure to include this one. This is another children's book. This is called Brother Hugo and the Bear. And this is about Brother Hugo. He has a manuscript and the manuscript gets eaten by a bear, and so he has to go and make a new copy of the manuscript at the other monastery. And here is a lovely page, and there's the manuscript in the bear's mouth. There we go. This is really another favorite of mine. Mary Jane Millington is an acquisitions assistant in the Beinecke Library at Yale University. And a few years ago, as a Halloween costume, she dressed up as the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript, if you haven't heard of it, is at the Yale Library, and nobody knows what it says. That's what the script looks like. Nobody has been able to figure out the script or what the language might be that the script is representing. A lot of people have theories, so every few months you'll probably see, if you start paying attention, you'll start seeing stories, really I'm not kidding, every few months some new theory comes up about what the Voynich manuscript is about. I like not knowing. I think it's great because it means you can do things like write novels about it. So here are a few novels from the private collection of Lisa Fagan Davis. She collects Voynich novels. And it's great because you can kind of make it into anything you want. You can even make it into your Halloween costume. And finally, the last one, when we're talking about manuscripts and the popular imagination, I do want to talk about this film. So this is called the Luttrell Psalter film. We talked about the Luttrell Psalter because we have a few facsimiles and the digital images on the website here. Back in 2010, WAG Films in the UK made this film, and what they're doing is they're reenacting scenes from the Luttrell Psalter. So the Luttrell Psalter has many of these scenes, sort of village life scenes. So if we take another look at the manuscript, you can see here is somebody planting seed, and then here they are with the horse pulling the plow. And so the film was about recreating some of these scenes. And it was filmed in the same village that housed the manor house, or the village that was next to the manor house of the person who had the Luttrell Psalter made. So it's a beautiful film, and you've probably heard the music that's been playing. It's lovely, and I'm so thrilled that I had permission to include the film in the exhibit because I think it really made it special. I hope that you have enjoyed this tour. Thank you very much.